Hello students, welcome to the ongoing lecture series on international business. Today we will discuss Instruments of Trade Control Part 3. In this, we are going to cover the following topics: tariff war, a case study of US tariff hike on India, World Trade Organization and its initiative to reduce tariffs, and we will also discuss the non-tariff barriers. Tariff war is a kind of a trade war. A tariff war is an economic conflict in which each country levies an additional tax on the other's exports. Tariff war is a form of a trade war or economic conflict often resulting from extreme protectionism. So, one of the country begins such a war by increasing the tariff or imposing the tariff on the exports of another country, and the other country will also retaliate, and this is the beginning of a tariff war. Tariff wars are also known as customs wars or toll wars. In a tariff war, one country raises tariff rates on another's exports. As a reprisal or a retaliatory measure, the latter state may also increase the tariffs, and like that it begins the tariff war. Why it happens? The reasons for tariff war. We all have already discussed in our previous lecture the reasons behind imposing tariff. Now we will discuss in detail the reasons for tariff war. First and foremost, the reason remains the same as we have discussed in tariff, that is protectionism. Protectionism refers to government actions and policies that restrict international trade to shield domestic businesses and jobs from foreign competition, and also to balance the trade deficits. So, protectionism is the first and foremost the reason behind a tariff war or why a country begins such a war. Another reason may be there may be rift between the countries. So, tariff wars generally start when the leadership of one country is unhappy with the trade partner's trading behavior. Now, US under the previous or the first Trump government also, and now also, they had a continuous rift with countries like China and Brazil, and so they have always imposed a higher rate of tariff on these countries, and now India is another target of US. So, the reason may be geopolitical reasons also, which is an extension of that rift. A tariff war is designed to hurt other countries economically. For example, goods from certain countries with which Trump has political grievances are subject to particularly high rates. For example, India importing Russian oil is one of the major reasons because of which that the Trump government is imposing higher tariff on India, because they believe that it is fueling the Russia-Ukraine war. Or even on Russia they are imposing tariff because Russia is not stopping war with Ukraine. So, it is a geopolitical reason. Another reason may be trade deficits. A country may wish to reduce its trade deficits with another country, and that is why impose a higher tariff on that country. Now, trade deficit occurs when a country's imports exceed its exports. Protectionism in the form of tariffs is also a method used to balance trade deficits as it restricts imports. Domestic trade unions or industry pressure may be another reason for imposing tariff. So, the domestic trade unions or industry lobbyists can pressurize politicians to make imported goods less attractive to consumers, pushing trade policy towards a trade war. So, this is to safeguard the interest of the trade unions or labor or the businesses as such of that country. Now, what is the impact of a tariff war? Because once a tariff war begins from one country to another, then it may take the form of a tariff war, and later on there may be increase in the prices of the commodities in both the countries, and it may lead to some inflationary conditions also. So the impact is tariff discourage the citizens of the importing country from buying the exporting country's products by raising the total cost of those products. So the products become expensive in that country where the goods are exported from one country and imported in that country. So it becomes expensive for the citizens of that country. In an era of global trade, a trade war can become very damaging to the consumers because they have to pay more, and the businesses because there will be lost sales in many of the countries, lost exports in many of the countries, and of the both nations. And the contagion can grow. So it's contagious and it may affect many aspects of both the economies. The two countries in which there is a between which there is a tariff war, both the countries will suffer, their consumers as well as the businesses. A trade war that begins in one sector can grow to affect other sectors. So, since all the sectors are interdependent and interrelated, so if there is a tariff war on specific goods, then it will have its repercussion on other goods as well. So, other sectors will also be affected. Likewise, a trade war that begins between two countries can affect other countries not initially involved in the trade war. So, if US and India is having a kind of a tariff war kind of a situation or a trade war, other countries may take positions, or they may also impose tariff on the other country. So, it will not remain between the two countries. In fact, the entire world will be affected by it. Now, let's discuss the impact of high tariff imposed by US on Indian exports in the form of a case study. So, the impact is that the US has first hiked the tariff to 25% and then imposed an additional 25% tariff on Indian imports, citing India's Russian energy purchases, raising the total tariffs to 50%, and that is the highest for any nation. Now, previously the tariff on Indian exports to US for certain commodities was only 2.4%. So, if we take the example of that commodity in which previously it was only 2.4% tariff, so the US customer needed to pay only $102.4 for a $100 product exported from India in the previous situation. With a tariff of 50% on Indian exports to the US, a US customer now needed to pay $150 for a $100 product exported from India, which was previously available for only $102.4. So, there is a substantial rise in the price of the commodity in that country where the tariff laws are there and they are imposing a tariff on the imports. So, it is not that the exporting country will have to bear that expenditure, additional expenditure. The customer or consumers of the importing country will have to bear that expenditure. So, if the if for the same product exported by suppose another country like Vietnam, the US customer maybe they need to pay only $120. With US has increased the tariff on Vietnam from 9-10% to 20%. So, still it is much lower than what they have imposed on Indian exports. So, they will have to shell only $120 for a product manufactured in Vietnam. Vis-a-vis that, for an Indian product, they have to shell out $150. So, the customer will prefer to buy a Vietnamese product rather than the now expensive Indian product. So, in this way, the Indian exporters will suffer because their market will now go to Vietnam in US. India condemned this move as unfair, unjustified and unreasonable because it could reduce India's annual GDP, the gross domestic product, by over 0.5 percentage points. While officially citing India's energy imports from Russia as the major reason for targeting India with higher tariff, the additional tariff appears aimed at pressurizing India into signing a US favorable trade deal. So you can understand the geopolitical situation over here. Like US wants a favorable trade deal, and that's why it is resorting to such kind of coercive tactics. Trump has labeled India as one of the most protectionist nations with high trade and non trade barriers limiting foreign market access. So, they believe that India in itself is a protectionist nation and they don't allow free movement of goods to their country. This enables India to maintain a trade surplus with the US. So, it means that India exports more to the US than it imports from US. So, that was bothering Trump government. Trump's broader goal is to reduce the trade deficit and establish what he considers balanced trade relations. So, they want to reduce the trade deficit. So, this is one of the reason. A tariff acts as a tax or on imported goods, making them costlier for the domestic consumers. So, as we have discussed the case, so with a 50% tariff on Indian imports, US buyers will find these products significantly more expensive. This will lead to reduced demand for Indian products as they may switch to cheaper alternatives from other countries, as in our example, they may move to Vietnamese products. So, imports from India will decline while US exports to India will remain unchanged, and this will lead to the US trade deficit with India will narrow. So, narrowing down of US trade deficit with India will happen and it could eventually be eliminated. So, that was the whole modus operandi of US government. Now, tariffs can also be used as a tool to push for a trade deal, as we have said that they wish to have a favorable trade deal with our country. So, tariffs are being used to pressurize India into a trade deal, compelling India to open its domestic markets to more US goods, thereby boosting US exports. Also, urging the Indian government to purchase more of American products like defense equipment, crude oil, etc., and hence narrowing the deficit. So, right now we are buying defense equipment from different countries, but US wants that they should buy it from us. Why retaliatory measures may backfire for India? So, if India resorts to retaliatory tariffs by increasing tariff on US product, right now this will not be beneficial for India, because this will lead to further or ammunition for the tariff war. Imposing tariffs on US imports would hurt Indian consumers by raising costs and reducing imports from the US. This could widen India's trade deficit, prompting further US tariffs. Now, impact of US tariffs on Indian economy as such and on jobs, that is also important to see. High tariff will hit companies, workers and disrupt the whole of the supply chain. Indian exporters, especially in labor intensive sectors, may lose contracts to competitors in tariffed countries. So, there are several countries on which US is not imposing any tariff or not that kind of high tariffs. So, they will gain at the cost of Indian exporters. This will cause job losses and livelihood disruptions in India. This will also lead to GDP decline and employment devastation. So, India is really worried about US imposing high tariff on Indian exports. Now, if we take a look at the overall economic exposure, only around 20% of India's goods exports, about 2% of GDP are US bound, limiting the direct macroeconomic hit. So, we are not solely exporting to US. Certain sectors are disproportionately dependent on US trade, making them more vulnerable. So, we will discuss those sectors which will be greatly affected by this kind of tariff hike, and those which will not be that much affected. Experts estimate that $8 billion worth of exports, including gems and jewelry, apparel, textiles and chemicals, could be most at risk. So, if we discuss the sectoral impact, I said that some of the sectors will be more impacted by this tariff hike than the others. So, which are the vulnerable sectors? Gems and jewelry, textiles, apparel and chemicals are expected to bear the brunt, potentially prompting targeted government support measures. There are certain other sectors which are less affected, like the information technology or IT sectors are not targeted at present, and this is shielding the equity market. Pharmaceutical exports to the US as yet remain unaffected. Then there are certain sectors which are considered as excluded goods. Steel, aluminium, they are taxed separately. Semiconductors and derived electronic products are exempted. So, it is not that this will have an impact on all the sectors. Specific sectors will be affected by this tariff hike. Now, what will be the India's strategic response to US tariffs? In the short term, India must focus on minimizing losses through trade negotiations. There is still scope for trade negotiation, as China is doing it with the with US. So, initially there was a kind of a situation, where we believe that a tariff war has begun between US and China, but with negotiation there is now a 90 days standoff from both the sides, and they are still maintaining the old tariff rates on each other. So, India can also go for trade negotiations. In long term, it needs urgent domestic reforms to boost manufacturing, skill development and infrastructure quality. So, if you are producing high quality products, then naturally you have markets in other country. So, you will not be that US dependent. Besides developing logistic efficiencies and ease of doing businesses, tax relief can also be provided. Also, human resource policy should be there, leveraging its young population. All these are essential strategies in the long run. Now, there is this international body which we will be discussing later on also, World Trade Organization. It has a significant role to play in reducing tariffs, and they are doing so. But somehow, in the present circumstances, when there is a kind of a tariff war initiated by US, WTO is not taking enough actions. But what actions they can take, let us discuss that. So, what is the WTO role? WTO plays a pivotal role in regulating tariffs through various agreements and rules. The organization's primary objective is to promote free and fair trade among its member countries. So, it is striving for a non-tariff kind of world from the very beginning, and they were always proposing a free trade kind of situation, which is still never happened between countries of the world. By establishing a framework for tariff bindings, schedules and modifications, the WTO aims to reduce trade barriers and facilitate the smooth flow of goods across borders. So, they came out with GATT Article 2. We have already discussed in one of the previous lectures that previously there was general agreement on tariff and trade, and then later on it took the shape of WTO. So, there was this GATT Article 2 which was adopted by WTO. What does it says? GATT Article 2 provides the foundation for tariff bindings, which are commitments by WTO member countries to limit their tariffs on specific goods. Tariff bindings are essential for ensuring predictability and stability in international trade. And what does it say? The Article 2, Clause 1A. Each contracting party shall accord to the commerce of the other contracting parties treatment no less favorable than that provided for in the appropriate part of the appropriate schedule annexed to this agreement. In simple terms, if they are having a favorable trade agreement with one of the countries, the same will apply to all the countries. So, there will be no discrimination between the countries while imposing tariff, but US is right now violating that. Then WTO also follows some tariff schedules. So, tariff schedules are detailed lists of tariffs that WTO member countries have committed to applying to specific goods. So, these schedules are an integral part of a country's WTO commitments and are essential for ensuring transparency in tariff policies. What are the significance of tariff schedules? It helps in providing clarity on tariff rates and their application, facilitating the negotiation of tariff reductions and bindings, ensuring compliance with WTO rules and commitments. Now, third area is WTO rules on tariff modifications and renegotiations. WTO member countries can modify their tariff commitments under certain circumstances. The WTO provides a framework for tariff negotiations, allowing countries to adjust their tariff bindings in response to changing economic conditions or trade policies. Notifications to the WTO of the proposed changes is the first step in the process of tariff negotiation. Second step is consultation with affected WTO member countries, and third step is agreement on the modified tariff bindings. So, if we see, this is the process of tariff renegotiation, and what you can understand that US is not following any of the steps of this process. Now, since WTO is envisaging a world where free trade is possible and there are no tariff barriers, they are imposing certain restrictions on tariff. Now, most of the governments of different countries, they are resorting to non-tariff barriers. So, now we will discuss the non-tariff barriers. Now, non-tariff barriers refer to any government regulation, policies or procedures other than a tariff that has the impact of minimizing imports. This is also considered as a protectionist measure. So, directly you are not imposing a tax or tariff on an article which is coming in your country, but you are creating non-tariff barriers in different forms to restrict import of goods, sometimes export of goods also. So, the types of non-tariff barriers are non-tariff barriers may be classified into which have direct influence on the price of the goods being imported and which influences the or control the quantity of goods being imported. So, sometimes price and sometimes the quantity. So, that is non-tariff barrier. Now, if we talk about the types of non-tariff barriers, there are many like restrictions, direct price influences, quantity controls, exchange controls, fiscal barriers, administrative and technical barriers and state trading. So, we will discuss each one of them over the 2 lectures. We will begin with the restrictions. So, the first is restrictions. Now, restrictions can be in the form of total ban on imports from a specific country or a selected products. So, this implies prohibition of import of selected items in a country. The purpose is to protect domestic industries which have lost international competitiveness or which are politically sensitive. So, suppose in India we think of a product, a particular kind of a pharmaceutical product which we are already producing in our country, we do not want competition in that sector. So, that kind of product, pharmaceutical product can be totally banned to be imported in our country. It can be any of the agricultural product also. Then another is a much softer restriction, and that is import licensing. Rather than totally banning it, you can have a condition that you can import the product only if you are a license holder. So, those who want to import are required to obtain a license. This controls the total volume of imports. And the third one is export licensing. Exports of certain products may also be regulated through licensing, like we generally have restriction on imports, but sometimes we can have restriction on exports also of some rare products or agricultural products or staple goods which we want more to be consumed in our country. So, we can restrict the export of such goods also. So, this is the first non-tariff barrier that we have discussed, that is restriction. Rest we will discuss in our next lecture. So, to summarize what we have studied till now, a tariff war is an economic conflict in which each country levies an additional tax on the other's exports. Reason for tariff war are protectionism, rift between countries, or geopolitical reasons. The impact of tariff war is that it discourages the citizens of importing country from buying the exporting country's product as they become expensive. A trade war can become very damaging to the consumers and businesses of both the nations. The US case study we have discussed, where it has hiked the tariff to 50% on Indian imports, citing India's Russian energy purchases. The aim of US is to pressurize India to sign US favorable trade deal and to reduce the trade deficit. WTO plays a pivotal role in regulating tariffs through various agreements, rules, and to promote free and fair trade among the member nations. For this, WTO has established a framework for tariff bindings, schedules, and modification. Then we have discussed the non-tariff barriers, which can be have either direct influence on price or the quantity of the goods being imported, and we have discussed one non-tariff barrier, and that is restriction by banning imports, import licensing and export licensing. So, rest we will discuss in our next lecture. Thank you, students.